Hello, guys. Welcome back to another week of amazing learning. This week, we are talking about intelligence, which is our last part of the cognition unit, which is the last unit before we start reviewing for the AP Psychology exam. So, intelligence. What everyone wants, but not what everyone has. So let's talk about intelligence, and we're going to first start off with intelligence testing. And this is not just IQ tests, but we're going to start off with basically any type of test and the differences between different types of tests, whether AP test or an IQ test or whatever. So there are two types of tests that you can take. You can take an aptitude test or an achievement test. So an aptitude test, it measures whether you can learn. It tries to predict your future performance, and it's like an SAT. You've probably taken the SAT or the ACT, and they try to measure how well you're going to do in college. It's not like, yes, you can study for those, but you're really studying the tools and the cognitive tests that they're going to put you through. So aptitude tests are designed to predict a person's future performance, is designed to predict, like SAT, designed to predict how well you're going to do in school. So a college entrance exam, SAT, if you go to graduate school, you got to take the GRE, the ACT, MCAT, there's a whole bunch of them. Those are aptitude tests. Achievement tests is basically not can you learn, but have you learned? So I'm going to teach you something, then I'm going to test you over it. That's an achievement test. It is designed to test what a person has learned. So basically think of the EOC test or 9 weeks exams.
Motion detected at your front door.
Motion detected at our front door. I don't see anybody. Maybe just the wind. And the AP exam. It's going to test whether you know AP psychology. And it's going to test your reasoning skills, but then have you learned these definitions? So aptitude test, can you learn? Achievement test is have you learned? So we're talking about IQ tests. The most famous, widely used IQ test is the WAIS, or the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. There's also one for children, and it's the CIS. So switch the children and adults. And it's created by David Wechsler, and it has 11 subtests, and it uses factor analysis. Okay, so I think is it the SAT that has 3 subtests, and I think the ACT has 4. There's a reading part and a writing part, science and a math part. Well, that's what a subtest is. It's there's different little sections. You have a little section and you stop, kind of like the AP exam. There's typically a multiple choice and an FRQ section. Those are 2 little subtests. And it uses factor analysis to see our strengths and our weaknesses. So factor analysis might be the first 5 questions are about reading comprehension, and the next 5 questions are about vocabulary, and the next 5 questions are grammar. So it breaks down even the subparts of the test. So it measures they did really, really well with grammar, but they didn't know their vocabulary, something like that. If you sometimes wonder what teachers do, you probably know what a TEK is. It's the things that we have to teach that are going to be on the EOC. It's based on the state of Texas, we have to teach these things. So in a team, like the U.S. history team or the geography team or world history, whatever, they'll sit down and they'll look at their tests they're going to give for the 9 weeks or maybe a unit exam, and they TEK each of the questions. They say, okay, question 1 is asking about this certain objective that we had to teach, and question 2 is about this certain objective. So they know what objectives are on the test, how many questions for each objective. So when they run your Scantron and they say wow, 40% of people miss this thing. Okay, what's that TEK? What day did we teach that TEK on? How did we teach that TEK? And what messed up? Why are so many people how did we teach it? I guess we didn't teach it well enough, so let's go back and reteach and tweak. And so that's teaching in a nutshell. So here's some examples of questions that are on the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale right here. What day of the year is Independence Day? In what ways are wool and cotton alike? So there's lots of correct answers for some of these. You might say, what day of the year is Independence Day? You might say, like, well, what country are we talking about? Am I being egotistical here and assuming it's the United States? Am I talking about like this year it'll be on a Wednesday, but next year it'll be on a Thursday? So different people with higher intelligences might answer these questions differently. So sometimes there's not one right answer. Same thing with wool and cotton. You could say like they both have two O's, or you could say that they're both used to make textiles. But there's not like, I mean, there's obviously wrong answers. I heard a student say they both come from animals. No, cotton does not come from an animal. So there's that. These tests are timed, so the faster you respond, the better your score is going to be. If it takes you a really long time to say a right answer, that lowers your score. Of course, it doesn't lower your score as much as like a wrong answer would be. Okay, so let's talk about what all good tests have in common. And there's 3 criteria for it to be considered a good test. And everyone in here, everyone that's watching this, has taken a bad test before. And let's talk about it. A good test is standardized. Okay, so not every test you're going to take in high school or in college is going to be a standardized test, but the EOC, that's standardized. The ACT and the SAT, that's standardized as well. The AP exam is standardized. Standardized means that your scores are based off of a pre-tested group. So they test the group maybe of the year before you, and they see like, okay, the average person did this, and the really high scoring people did this, and the really low scoring people did this, and they come up with a bell curve that looks something like this. It comes up with a normal curve. So a normal distribution, that's what that says. Results will have this distribution. And then they decide based on like last year, this many people, 50% of people are going to pass, 50% of people are going to fail, whatever. Let's figure out what the curve is going to be. So I forget what year it was. I want to say it was like 2012, I think. So this was the very first year of, it wasn't 2012, but I don't know what year it was. It was the very first year of the EOC. And before that, they had, what was it called? It doesn't matter. The state test has changed names like so many times. So they had to have a pre-tested group to compare the scores against of what score is good and what score is bad and what should be average and what's failing and passing or whatever. And so they had the group of seniors that had just graduated, they had taken the test, but it didn't count for or against them. They just took the test so that there would be a pre-tested group to measure your scores against. Well, imagine how they did. It wouldn't have affected their graduation at all. They were just like, here's a test, take it, it won't affect you. So like everyone did really, really poorly. A lot of people just like put C all the way down and fell asleep, which means like the average person got like a 30 on the test. Well, next year's group is juniors taking that world history or US history EOC. Their results were based off of the previous year's scores. And so to get like commended, you only needed like 50% right to get commended. You only needed to get like 30% right to pass. And so each year, as we get better and better and better at teaching the test and knowing what's going to be on the test and how to teach it, it's harder and harder to get commended because you're always tested against the previous year's group. And the previous year gets, like I said, every year gets smarter and smarter. That's called the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect means like our IQs are actually going up as a generation, not your IQ, but overall, we are getting smarter every single year and have been. And that's for a variety of reasons. We have access to more information. We have better like health in terms of our diet. We're getting more fruits and vegetables more than our grandparents did. You know, they had to wait for things to be in season to eat like a vegetable. We can get it any time of the year. And we also have like the internet and better access to education. So, because of that, we are smarter every single year. All right. Another criteria that a test needs to have is it needs to be reliable. Meaning I can test it different ways and you're going to get the same score no matter how I test it. That's what it means for it to be a reliable test. Test, retest. Let's say I gave you guys a test on Monday and I totally lost all the tests. I don't know. And I'm like, guys, we're going to take it again. And you guys take it again on Tuesday. But magically, after you've taken 2 of the same basic type test, I'm like, oh, I found the Scantrons. And I grade them both. And it's like, well, Ashley, you got 80% on the first day and 80% right on the second day. That is a reliable test. Or split half tests. Maybe first half is taken on a Monday and the second half of the test is taken on a Tuesday. That is a reliable test. Meaning you shouldn't have like half of the test harder than the other half. There shouldn't be like, well, everyone got 100% right on the first 10 questions, but then everyone bombed the last 10 questions. That is not a reliable test. It should be evenly distributed of right and wrong throughout. And a test needs to be valid, meaning it needs to measure what it's supposed to measure. It needs to measure what it's supposed to measure. So it has to have content validity, meaning the AP Psychology test should have AP Psychology questions on it. It would not be a very valid test if I was all like, hey, let's throw some other content on there that they don't know of. That's not okay. That actually happened to me a couple of years ago. I had 2 quizzes in the front of the classroom, and it was like the beginning of AP Psych, and I grabbed the quizzes and I passed them out, and a good 3 or 4 minutes of like quizzing is happening, and people are looking at each other, and I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, Miss Taylor, this is eco stuff. Are we supposed to know economics? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I grabbed the wrong quiz. Why didn't anyone say anything? I just thought you were being mean. I'm like, that's no. That would not be a valid representation of how much AP Psychology you know. If I give you an AP Eco test, that's not valid. It needs to have predictive validity, meaning that if it's supposed to predict how well you do and you don't rise to that, then it's not very good when it comes to predictive validity. So, I've had students that do very, very well on the SAT and the ACT, which should predict how well you do in college. But then I find out later that they maybe dropped out, which makes me think that their ACT, their SAT did not have predictive validity because they did really well. So they should have done really well in college, but they didn't. It also needs to have construct validity. It needs to look like a test. For you to be fully tested on how much you know, you need to know that you're actually being tested. So this happened many years ago. This is like 10 years ago. I don't even know what teacher this was, but it was a physics teacher, and this was like AP physics, and the kids were told to go throw a ball back and forth like a football and measure the results of how many times they caught it. And they had to stand at 10 feet away and 20 feet away and 50 feet away or whatever and throw the ball back and forth. Well, they did this for a week outside. And this was during April. So people were really okay, I need to study for my AP exam. And a lot of students sat out and they're like, okay, I tossed the ball for Monday and Tuesday, but I've got other classes that I need to study for. And this seems like a waste of my time. So I'm not going to participate. And they just sat and did their other work. Well, at the end of the week, the teacher was like, oh, by the way, that was a major grade. What? They didn't know that beforehand. And so that how well they did at throwing and catching a football or whatever had no validity because they didn't even know it was a test. And so that has no construct validity because it didn't even look like a test. So how is that supposed to measure what you know if you're not even showing up to do it? Okay. Tomorrow, we will talk about the origins of intelligence testing, where intelligence testing began. But as of right now, we just went over the types of tests. So just to recap, there was aptitude tests and achievement tests, and then the 3 criteria of a good test. It needs to be standardized, it needs to be reliable, and it needs to be valid. Standardized, reliable, valid. Standardized, there needs to be a pre-tested group. Reliable, no matter how I test you, you're going to get the same score on every type of test, and it needs to be valid. It needs to test what it's supposed to measure. That's what it needs to do. That's what a good test needs to do. So I'll see you guys later. Hopefully you had a great weekend and a happy Easter, and I will see you guys tomorrow, which is Tuesday. So have a good night. Bye.